Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. A packed day of racing, 6 races at the European Championships in Pontevedra, Spain. A lot to talk about. No AI voice with me here. The much more knowledgeable Patrick is here. He is a bike knower. He's from the US. He's our photographer. He rides a lot of bikes. So he thought, well, why not spend my Sunday morning waking up at 5 a.m. to watch some racing? Patrick, thank you for helping me out while Isham is still not here.
Thanks for having me, Noah.
Let's dive straight into the action. A very fast course in Pontevedra. The men's elite race saw a rocket start from Rémi Lelandais. The Frenchman thought, this is my moment to shine. He took off in the first lap, but obviously he didn't last. Towards the end of the lap, he got overtaken by Eli Iserbyt quite shortly after Lelandais made a mistake. Iserbyt had a gap, but it was too early for him to go. He got caught, Van Toerenhout went, but really the first decisive moment in the race was when Philippe Orts attacked, roughly halfway through. Nys was kind of invisible up until that point, 30 minutes, but then he decided this is my time, I need to do something now. Orts is a dangerous rider. He got up, he waited, and we got a regrouping again. But at this moment, deep into the final, some 15-20ish minutes to go, Iserbyt went into the pits. He changed his bikes, and there was a gap. Nys and Orts were ahead of the gap, and they were never seen again. Iserbyt hoped that Van der Haar would close the gap in the background, but Van der Haar hoped Iserbyt would do it. Both eventually made an attempt to close that gap, but it didn't work out. Nys and Orts went into the final lap together, knowing they would finish first and second, but in which order would they finish? Nys made the stronger impression and also confirmed that in the final lap. Orts made a number of technical mistakes and eventually the elastic band between him and Nys snapped. Nys took the title coming across the line as an airplane ahead of Orts, who was very happy with second. Third place eventually went to Eli Iserbyt. He fought off Niels van der Putten for that position after Lars van der Haar got dropped walking the barriers. Patrick, we had Thibau Nys after the finish say, I was in total control of this race. It did look that way.
Yeah, I think it was pretty clear that he was in control the whole race. He was kind of calling the shots. The first half, he hung out in the group, just kind of stayed quiet. And then the second half of the race, you saw him come to the front.
It was. You saw the experience of a road racer here. You know how at the World Championships you always need to be calm because the race is 260 kilometers? It was kind of the same here because the course, I liked it. I'm interested to hear what you thought about it. But it had a lot of a grass crit. It was super fast, and then it's important to conserve energy. We'll come to other races where riders certainly made the mistake of not doing that.
Yeah, so two things there. I mean, the first thing is, of the people in that race, who's the best road racer?
Yeah, you would probably say Thibau Nys is the best road rider.
And it's a grass crit, and it's very similar to a road race, and who wins?
Also Thibau Nys.
Yeah, so no surprise there, and he played it pretty well. It was a good result for him. You could see at the end that he was very excited. And then second to the course, that was a pretty fun track. It was quick. It had a little bit of technical in there at the end. I think it was just missing though one other technical part.
I would agree that it would have been better if the sandpit, for instance, would have been allowed to be raked. Apparently that's not allowed by UCI regulations, or if there was some other feature, but it was an old school course. Before they started adding a billion corners to please TV operators and sponsors, this is how cyclocross courses were, as there's a helicopter flying over my house again, but that's how they were. And we've seen super fast World Cups in the past in Wortegem, Petegem. We've seen the World Championships in Hooglede Gids. So yes, it's an atypical cyclocross course for modern standards, but it's fine and it made for very entertaining races. I thought it was evident that in the first part of the race Nys was sitting back because you saw that a number of times there were a couple of gaps that dropped and he was able to close them. And then halfway through the race when he started placing these attacks, you saw, okay, he's also jumping in the barriers now, he's starting to take a bit more risk. He has it in control, and I still want to say that it is a remarkable, maybe comeback is not the right word, bounce back would be the word I would choose to use, because his start to the season was very bad, and we have seen many times in the past that people don't bounce back from this. Bart Wellens, as world champion in 2005, had a horrible season, and every week the commentators were like, oh, next week he'll be back. Oh, if the courses get better, if the conditions get better. It is, of course, now easier because we know more about training and stuff, but still, it's a remarkable bounce back, and that it results in the European title based on today's race is only deserved. In the final lap, I think it was no surprise that Orts eventually couldn't keep up with him. They're different caliber riders, but Orts overall, man, he should be super, super happy with this ride.
Yeah, Orts overperformed. And when he attacked in the middle of the race, I think it was lap 5, he was already looking gassed. And the fact that he survived to the end was pretty amazing.
So, what do you think made the difference here today for him? Because I agree that he overperformed, but what was key to that?
I think he was able to stay at the front. He was able to stay with Thibau. He was able to stay in front of all the fray. And that helped him kind of stay with the front and stick with it. I think the course plays into his favor quite a bit. The speed, the lack of really defining technical features kind of played into his hand. But yeah, it was an awesome ride by Felipe.
Orts is a tough rider to judge because he can do it on any course now, and still there's this image around him of, well, he's good on fast courses or he's good on muddy courses. I think we just need to come to the conclusion that Orts is developing every year still. He's becoming a very versatile rider, and I agree, his positioning made the difference today. He was able to put himself in a position for which a bit of luck meant a medal came his way, because I still wonder what exactly happened when Iserbyt pulled into the pits. There's been no interview with him. Maybe it comes while we record this podcast, but I don't know. It was weird to see how Iserbyt raced, because first, when he was on the back foot, when Nys and Orts were on the attack, Iserbyt was hanging behind. He could close the gap, at least that's the impression he made to me, but he was refusing to do so. He comes back, he goes into the pit, there's a gap, he doesn't really seem decisive. I don't really know what he was up to.
He was definitely up to something, and it's hard to know what he was doing. I mean, that was the defining moment of the race when he went into the pit. The whole group kind of fell apart at that point. We were starting to see the group come back together. About half a lap they spent together, and then again it fell apart. Now back to Orts. If Orts is at the back of that group when Iserbyt goes into the pit, he's done. His day's over. But being at the front, being with Thibau, he was able to stick with it and end up getting second. I mean, a lot of it's luck, a lot of it's skill, and it worked out for him today.
Positioning was key, as it always is in fast races, and it certainly helped Orts. I stressed it, I think, last week in the Hear the podcast, but I'll do it again. The technical abilities of Orts are absolutely insane. They are almost unmatched. The way that he can catapult himself through corners, and yes, this course was not that technical, but if you look through the corners, how close he is confident of riding on the wheel of Nys, because he knows he's in total control of his bike, is absurd. And that is something that definitely helps him. But overall, I agree, the tactical and positioning game today made the difference for Orts in getting a podium. And man, it was good to see that there were so many spectators there cheering him on, and the people really showed up. The people from Portugal, the people from the Galicia and Basque region. Cyclocross is booming there. I think Iserbyt will go home with a bit of a different feeling, though. What did you think? Because we were trying to make sense of it. What do you think of the idea that Paul Sauze had a different goal than the Belgian team here? Because in the first part of the race, we saw Iserbyt and Van Toerenhout, just like last year, let gaps to each other, kind of clogging it up, trying to make moves. And then in the second half, we still saw that Iserbyt was apparently racing against Nys.
Yeah, that was pretty clear. I mean, you saw in the beginning of the race too, Lars van der Haar wanted to be in front of the fray, right? He didn't want to get clogged up by Easterbin and Van Toornhout. And so he stayed at the front, maybe a little bit too long for him because he ended up fading at the end, but it was clear that he was trying to break up those team tactics. And then right later in the race, you didn't see, a Belgian versus Spanish, I guess, race at the end. You saw, trade teams racing each other. And that's unfortunate in these kind of races. We don't see national team races very often in cross. And, it'd be cool to see a race that way versus, the trade team races that happen once or twice a week.
It's always how it goes at these championships, especially if there's no clear Belgian leader. Iserbyt wants to win the title, Nys wants to win the title, so they're always right in between. So, do I choose my trade team, make my sponsor happy, try and get that bonus that's in my contract for this title, or do I make the Belgian team happy, which gets me absolutely nothing down the line? Apart from maybe some prestige from the national team coach, but that's an international team coach at the moment. So it makes sense that they do it, and I don't blame them, especially not here. And in the end, it doesn't backfire. Of course, after the Van Berg, the headlines were all, ooh, Belgian team, oh, we're so bad, how can we let Van der Haar smoke 8 Belgians? But here, it works out for them, and I do think that it was apparent that Iserbyt was trying to pressure Nys into continuing in the attack, knowing that as soon as he gets to that wheel of Nys and Orts, he sits up, because that's exactly what happened once Iserbyt reached that group, because Iserbyt refused to take the lead, and I think it makes sense, and we shouldn't be too harsh on that for these races, because at the end of the day, if they are rivals every week, can you really expect them to all of a sudden be best friends here trying to beat Philippe Orts and Lars van der Haar when you're with 8 Belgians, or maybe today 4 or 5 Belgians at the front? Is that realistic?
No, and you see it across all of the cycling disciplines. I mean, you saw it at Road Worlds in Switzerland. It's just the way it is. Is there a better way? I don't know, but it kind of leads to that dynamic, the way it's set up.
Let's look at the entire top 10 then. Thibau Nys took the win ahead of Philippe Orts, Eli Iserbyt, Niels van der Putten and Lars van der Haar. David Menu finished 6th ahead of Gerben Kuipers, Michael Boros was 8th, Laurens Week was 9th and Michael van Toerenhout, the defending champion, finished 10th on a course that doesn't suit him at all. Let's take a look at some riders in specific here in this top 10. Let's start with Niels van der Putten, 4th place. I think that was a decent ride by him. He just seemed to be missing 1% compared to the races earlier this season when we saw him compete for victory. He seemed a little bit flat, to me at least.
Yeah, he seemed like he was just kind of hanging on in that second group. He ended up finishing ahead of Van der Haar, but I think that was more about Van der Haar burning matches earlier in the race than it was about him finishing ahead.
Yeah, because you mentioned something interesting there about Van der Haar. We talked about the Belgian team tactics, that they perhaps didn't really work out, but they still played some part in the race because Van der Haar was outnumbered and he did need to do a lot of work early on in the race. Do you think that ultimately cost him perhaps where he should have finished on the podium?
I think without the matches burned early in the race, yeah, he does stay with Iserbyt. He has a chance at that third place spot. But going back to the team tactics, we saw after the finish, Van der Haar congratulating Thibau. Does he do that early race move to kind of set up Thibau and keep the Paul Sausen guys from kind of running away and playing their team tactics?
I don't think so. I think in the first part of the race, Van der Haar definitely raced with the intention of getting an as good result for himself as possible. Yes, it helped Thibau Nys stay out of the wind, but in the first part, Van der Haar was still mainly focused on his own result. What I do think is at the end of the race, when the decisive move is made after Iserbyt goes into the pits, at that point Van der Haar thinks, okay, we're deep into the race, I've already spent a lot of energy, I have maybe 1 or 2 shots left. Iserbyt, your turn. Time to put your cards on the table. How much do you want to win? Do you accept Thibau Nys, a Belgian, becoming champion or not? Iserbyt gave it a go, didn't have it. Van der Haar gave it a go, also didn't have it. And then in the final lap he got dropped on the barriers and completely faded. I think that's halfway through the races where Van der Haar shifted his priorities from, okay, well, if it's not for me, then for Nys. Whereas at the beginning, he was like, if not for Nys, then for me.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, you can see how it kind of finishes out. He does fade after those barriers. You can see he was pretty much gassed. And frankly, everybody was fading after the barriers on that last lap. The only one that looked really strong at that point was Thibau, and he goes on to win.
It was a brutal race. I mean, the course is easy, but that doesn't matter because they went hammer right from the start, and that's the only way that this race eventually splits up. If you don't do that, then you end up with just the peloton going into the final few laps, and clearly that's not what they wanted. And somebody like Zweek paid the price for that because Sweek had a very bad start, was far back, but his lap times throughout the rest of the race were quite good. But he was chasing, and because the pace, with the exception of maybe one straightaway, never dropped. So he pays the price for that, doesn't really come back. Lelandais completely blew up throughout the race, but we saw another Frenchman surge, David Menu. That's quite a surprising name in the top 10, isn't it?
Yeah, that's pretty surprising. I wouldn't have expected to see Devin Manu in the top, 10, finishing at six. That's a good result for him.
What I thought was quite funny was that the Belgians, at the start of the race, they showed the start list, and the first 10 were 8 Belgians and 2 Dutch. And they said, oh, this pack of names is going to be shuffled, and that will be our top 10. And then, of course, that doesn't happen at all because Orts ends in the top 10, and Menu ends in the top 10, and Boros ends in the top 10, and Lilo almost ends in the top 10. But Menu is quite a specialist on these type of fast races. I recall 2 seasons ago he finished 10th in the Waterloo World Cup, which back then was also a bone dry fast race. I think he also ended on the podium there of the C2 the day before the World Cup, but I'm not entirely sure on that. Or it might be on the Friday actually, but he's quite good on these courses. Still, it's a surprising result, but what about Boros then in the top 10? Because yes, Boros was good at last year's World Championships, but can you draw a bigger contrast between the course in Tabor and this course?
Oh, they couldn't be more different. I think the course in Tabor was hilly. It was relatively slow with the moisture, and this course was Formula One. It was so fast.
And Boros is 32. He also was not a name that I would have expected here in the top 10 right away. I would have perhaps expected a rider like Viseur, but it's not a course for him. He clearly had some issues with the heat. Toon Aerts, also not a good race for him, 14th. Same point can be made. He doesn't like the heat, but I will also conclude this. Toon Aerts, against the current level top riders, is not at the same relative level as he was a few seasons ago before his suspension. Back then he was able to fight with Iserbeat, also on fast pan-flat courses. Then to the most serious matter here, who do you think deserves the blow-up of the day award? Should it go to Rémi Lelandais, who paced in the first lap, or should it go to Pim Ronhaar, who paced in the third lap and then fell back to 20th?
Well, I think the answer is pretty easy. It's Pin Ronhar. But Leyland Day, I mean, that's a good showing, right? He goes, he rides the first lap in the front, he gets himself on TV, and then he spectacularly blows up. It's awesome. I love it.
He's also a young guy. He is a first year elite, so he probably just got ahead of himself. Whoa, all of a sudden, here I am. But yeah, it was fine. About Ronhaar, though, I do wonder his motivation, and I would like your opinion on this, because Ronhaar at the Koppenberg gave an interview saying, I saw the course in Pontevedra. I'm happy I saw a GoPro lap before I started this race because I don't want to go there actually. I would rather stay at home. I'll just empty myself on the Koppenberg. I think it's a shame we need to travel so far for such a shitty course. To me, that doesn't really signal the right motivation for this race anyway.
Yeah, he's had a tough start to the season as it is with health issues. And then going in with kind of a negative mindset, it sets up for failure. And I think we saw here that 20th is not a good result at this race. And it does beg the question, should he have spent the time going to Spain? I mean, that's training loss. That's a big transfer. I don't know. But I mean, for me, that's the blow up of the day. That's the underperformance of the day.
Yeah, I think he should have gone, but should have gone with a different mindset. I think it's a stupid entitlement anyway, because the world doesn't revolve around Belgian and Dutch travel distances. It's much closer for the Portuguese and the Spanish riders. They don't complain that next year they need to go to Belgium and the next year to the Netherlands for the European Championships, even if they don't like the course. That's just how it goes sometimes, and I would appreciate it if he just sticks with the racing and it's cyclocross. Every week you get a different course. And then I prefer a mindset like Sanakant who says, yeah, it's not what we're used to, but that's the fun thing about cyclocross. Every week we get a different course and different circumstances.
Yeah, this is the age-old debate too about coming to the States, right? Nobody wants to come from Europe to the States to race, and we saw the American World Cups kind of wane because of that. And distance-wise, the American riders are driving this distance or more on a weekly basis to go to all the different races within the States. So, is it a little bit of an excuse? Yeah, I would say that's a true statement. But again, it's all about mindset. If you come into a race with a bad mindset, you're probably not going to perform well. And we saw that today.
Let's move on to the women's race then. There we had a big leading group in the first part of the race, but it was Lucinda Brandt, one of the top favorites, who had a bad start. Alvarado tried to capitalize on that in the opening lap, but she was unsuccessful in doing so. Brandt burned a bit of energy, but managed to come back into the fight for the victory. After a number of moves, we had Alvarado making most of them. Brandt made one. Van Empel tried a half attack. They got away with 3 for a while. We had a couple of chasers. We had a large number of leaders come back together. In the final lap, though, it were 4 riders, the 4 riders that we expected ahead of the race, that got away. Van Empel, Alvarado, Brandt and Casasola. Casasola mainly just had a prime view to a great battle for the European title. She didn't really feature in that movie herself. Van Empel did, but not in a positive way for most of it. She was in 3rd position as we approached the technical final section. There was jockeying for position. Brandt had the lead. Alvarado made a move and took the leading position. Brandt was behind, needed to defend from Van Empel. Van Empel at that point looked lost. It seemed like a lost cause for her. There was 1 minute of racing, but somehow she put her shoulder in, something we don't see her do that often, managed to pass Brandt, close the gap to Alvarado. Through the technical section, she was way out of her comfort zone. The entire race she struggled there, but in the final lap she managed to follow Alvarado. It came down to a sprint. Alvarado launched right off the corner, but in the final 25 meter, Van Empel came alongside to claim her 3rd consecutive European title. Alvarado needed to settle for 2nd, with Brandt claiming the bronze medal, but that was quite some final lap. It's been a while since a women's race in the final lap was that tense, that much jockeying for position. I'm still a bit stunned that Van Empel pulled it off, because a minute before I wouldn't have bet a single euro on her taking the win.
Yeah, that was a really, really solid last half lap from her. You could see that she had a few different plans and kind of worked through her different scenarios to see where she could get to the front. The first thing she tried to do is on the stairs, about with a half a lap to go. She tried to attack up the stairs and get around to the front. She almost got it, but Braun was, kind of blocked her out and kept her at 3rd place. And then through the technical section, the worst thing you want to do through that technical section, given what's been happening earlier in the race, is be behind Braun. Every lap, she was kind of messing up turns. She was dabbing a little bit. She was kind of the sketchiest through that area. So being 3rd through there was a rough spot, but Van Empel fought through it and then ultimately was able to get to Alvarado's wheel and then won in the sprint. That was a really good last lap to watch.
It's a win in a way that I've not seen Van Empel take one in a long time. Last week we devoted a lot of time in the podcast to talking about the rider Van Empel, her weaknesses. We elaborated on that in the preview, and positioning was her weakness. That's why I thought she was not going to win the title. I thought something would happen like what happened, but that she would not get past Brandt and therefore would need to settle for a lower position. But fair play to her, she got it done. As you said, she tried to make that move on the stairs. That was actually a very interesting moment, because Brandt first tried to pass Alvarado on the left. Alvarado closed the door. Brandt pivoted to the right. Alvarado then takes kind of this diagonal line up the stairs, so Brandt can't pass her, and as a consequence, Van Empel all the way on the right is blocked. You could see Alvarado being a master of the tactical game today. Every lap in that technical section she was in the lead, putting pressure on the rest. She defended her position well. She was in the position where she needed to be time after time again. Yes, she finishes 2nd, but to me, despite not winning, she rode the perfect race. Unless you see anything she could have done differently.
No, Alvarado did everything right. I mean, sometimes you do everything right and you get to that final sprint and it's just not there. And I think, she let it out. She was strong through that final technical section, and Van Empel just had one extra match to burn and was able to pull around right at the end.
Van Empel is a tough opponent to beat on a course like this. In many ways, she is a similar rider profile to Nys. Who wants to sprint against Van Empel? Not many. Who wants to sprint against Nys? Not many. I would say Van Empel is just, again, she lacks technical abilities that Nys has, and she lacks positioning abilities Nys has. But still, she's a rough opponent to beat. It's hard to get rid of somebody here. Brandt did feature prominently in that battle, but after that bad start, to me it seemed like Brandt never really settled into the race. As you said, she made many mistakes in that technical section, but she also never really placed that big attack, especially on the road section from behind. That's where you would normally see Brandt place one attack. She had one half-hearted attack, but after that bad start, I don't know if she was able to repack herself properly and settle into the groove.
She was on the back foot the entire race. And we talked about it on the men's side. I mean, who's the best road racer on the men's side? It's Thibau, and he goes on to win. Who's the best road racer on the women's side? It's probably Lucinda Brand. But her mistakes, she was on the back foot, slow start, all those things kind of added up, and no amount of road skill is going to overcome that.
No, and there was also no consistency in there because she messes up that left right steep uphill corner right after the pits twice, and then the next lap she nails it and even launches a dive bomb up to the steep wall onto the bridge. But then the next lap it looks a bit iffy again, and also I think Brandt got completely surprised by the fact that Van Empel dive bombed her into the 180 before the pit zone, the second pit zone, because Brandt hardly ever gets dive bombed. She always defends her space, and now she just got done there. To me, it just seemed like things didn't really go her way, and with the point I made about Ronhaar, Brandt didn't say it that extreme, but Brandt also said the Koppenberg is my priority. I do think that the Koppenberg was perhaps still in her legs, not necessarily because she didn't want to perform today. She was quite motivated in the start interview, but more because she went super, super deep on Friday, whereas I feel Van Empel could cruise a bit more in the final stages of that race.
Van Empel played kind of a risky card too by sitting third in that group the entire, last third of the race. So did she gamble? Yeah. Did it pay off? Absolutely, it paid off. But I think the loser here is Lucinda. I think she could have done more to get to the front. Whether or not she had the legs to do so, it probably seems like she didn't at the time. But, it's a gamble, and it didn't pay off for Lucinda today, but it did for Fem.
Yeah, Van Empel with, as I said, a bit of a surprise to me, at least in terms of her race style, but that deserves all the credit. Let's look at the entire top 10 then, because behind the All Dutch podium of Van Empel, Alvarado and Brandt, we find a lot of non-Dutch flags, which is not that often. We can say that in a cyclocross race. Casasola was 4th ahead of Amandine Foucounet. Alicia Frank finished 6th ahead of fellow Belgian Laura Verdonschot. Helene Clauzel finished 8th. Ninth place went to Aniek van Alphen, and Lucia Gonzalez Blanco took a 10th place. Briefly here about Casasola. We talked that Brandt was caught off guard at some point, needed to bridge that gap to Van Empel and Alvarado, who were escaped. Casasola couldn't make that. I feel for her, it's not as much as things didn't go her way, it's just more inexperience. She's not used to being at the front of these races, and that was visible today because she was on the back foot, but once she got that lifeline thrown, when everything came back together, you could see that physically she was significantly stronger than the rider she'd been with for 90% of the race.
Her performances at the beginning of this season have been very strong. So it'll be interesting to see how well she does now coming into the true Belgian season and the kind of colder weather, more traditional courses. It'll be interesting to see how Casasola does. But early season, she's performing really well, and it'll be interesting to see if she can get onto that podium.
We'll see much more of her in those muddy conditions. That's what she likes. And the course is atypical here, but the 4 riders at the front are the 4 riders that we had for most of the season. But then in 5th place, Amandine Foucounet. You just see that this course brings different riders to the front. We had Menu in the men's race, 6th place, and we have Foucounet here. Foucounet is a rider who has, horrendous. Horrendous is the word that describes her technical abilities, but her power is there. She's a road rider, races for Arkea, and you see that different courses bring different riders to the front, and the French clearly capitalized on that today because a 5th and a 6th in the elite races is something they will be very satisfied with.
I think this is a good example, too, of why we should have different types of courses and variety, because it does shake up the leaderboard. It brings different people to the front, and it's exciting to see that.
Yeah, and Foucault will be very happy with this. She started her cross season relatively early after a big road season with the goal of performing here. We saw her in the top 10 of Overijse. She is a strong rider, and it's good to see that she returns to the cross every year. Then the Belgian duo, both of the Keuster Bouwpunt, Frank and Verdonschot, 6th and 7th. What did you think of their races?
Yeah, I think for Verdonschot, she's more of a muddy course racer. You're not going to see her perform well on a fast course like today. So not quite a surprise that she's lower down the leaderboard, but still a good result for her.
She said she was aiming for a top 7 and she got 7th, so she'll be happy. And I think Frank with a 6th can also be happy. This is a course that plays to her strengths, and overall, the Belgians were quite happy having two women in the top 10 of a women's race. It's been quite a while that they had that luxury. Sonnekant also doesn't perform in these conditions, finished 15th. Ribeirol, same can be said with a 12th place. But to end the women's race discussion, Lucia Gonzalez Blanco will want to say that a 10th place is a very good finish for her. Then on to the women's U23 race. Mary Schreiber was the big favorite and she took control of the race right away. She led at the start and pretty much never gave away that leading position, but that would be quite a, well, to put it mildly, questionable decision because she wasn't alone. She didn't speed away from the rest. Leni Benveld and Celia Gerie were in her wheel until the final lap. In the final section, Schreiber tried to pull a trick, tried to force Gerie off the bike, but it didn't work. It came down to a sprint, and then Gerie took the win ahead of Schreiber, with Benveld finishing third. Patrick, these races were in the middle of the night for you. I do not blame you for not watching. Probably many of the listeners also didn't watch because, unlike me, they have a life, they have things to do on their Sunday. Unlike me, who can watch bike racing all day and then do a turbo trainer ride in between. So, what would you like to know? I'm happy to answer the questions that many listeners probably also have.
Well, it's a pretty big surprise that Schreiber doesn't take the win here. So what happened?
Well, in our preview podcast, Issam said Schreiber can only lose mechanicals, anything in that regard, false start, but we were wrong because Schreiber had a tactical disaster class. It was of the level Demi Vollering Cycling World Championships rode. It was of the level Dutch woman in Bogense 2019 World Championships. Schreiber took the lead at the start, and she didn't have a plan B. She never considered the possibility, like Issam and me did, that she would not be able to get away from the rest on this course. And for 40 minutes, we just watched Schreiber pace. That was the first mistake that she made. Then, the second mistake that she made was at the left-right, the steep uphill section towards the end of the lap after the pit zone where we saw Brandt make the mistakes. Schreiber deliberately put her foot down, hoping to force Gerie off the bike, but she did it too late. If she does it a second and a half earlier when she's diagonally blocking that line, Gerie is off the bike and Schreiber still wins, but she doesn't do that. Gerie gets the way around on the left-hand side and is right on the wheel of Schreiber. If Schreiber even just normally rides that section, there's a good chance she stretches out a 2-3 bike length gap, which could be enough through that final section. Gerie is on the wheel now, and then Schreiber also messes up her sprint, because out of the final corner, she only launches her sprint when Gerie is right next to her. Gerie had already pulled alongside. Everything that could go wrong tactically did go wrong for Schreiber, and really there are no excuses for this. In the end, Gerie takes the win. You saw her last year at the World Championships in Tabor take the title. It's quite remarkable that a first year wins this race, right? It shows great progression at such a young age already.
And especially against a rider like Schreiber, that's a great result for Gerie. Coming into her first U23 season, one of the first races she races this season, I mean, that's a great result.
And especially remaining calm. Yes, the win got handed to her on a silver platter, but everything she did was the right decision. And I do come to the question, Schreiber, she's in SD Works. There's no cyclocross specific coach in SD Works at the moment. They had Lars Boom. He's gone to FDG, which means he'll be working with Celia Gerie now, because she is on FDG. Gerie is on AS Bike Team in cyclocross. Those teams have a partnership. Schreiber is coached by Christian Kos. Do you know who Christian Kos is?
No idea.
I also didn't know who Christian Kos was. I googled him. I found a Pro Cycling Stats profile. He's been added to the SD Works coaching staff this year. He's not been there with the team a lot. So I question if the right people are around Schreiber and cyclocross at the moment. She was obviously very disappointed after the finish line. But yeah, ultimately, when she reflects on this race, she'll need to show more adaptability and learn that, okay, if plan A doesn't work, I need a plan B, and maybe I need a plan C. And it seemed like she did have some sort of backup plan, but that was executed very poorly. So everything doesn't add up for her at the moment. If we look at the rest of the top 10, Jury won ahead of Schreiber Bentveld. Then Zemanova was 4th, Moors was 5th, Gladenova 6th, Lucia Bramati finished 7th ahead of Amandine Mulet, Alice Papo and Iris Offrein. A few notes: Zemanova, in case you missed it, has had a COVID infection. She is not at her best. Bentveld, what do you think about Bentveld? Last year she was 2nd at the World Championships in Tabor, U23 that is. We saw her do quite well in a number of races, especially the muddy ones. 10th in the World Cup of Dublin. She was on the podium of the World Cup in Flamanville. She was 8th in Namur. But also in the fast races she did quite okay. She was 9th in Waterloo, 7th in Overijse, 6th in Maasmechelen. This season, 3rd place here. Normally, she would have been the number 1 rider you would expect to capitalize on the mishaps of Schreiber. And honestly, with a 14th place in Overijse and a 7th place in Ruddervoorde, it doesn't look too great to me. But what do you think about her season start?
I haven't noticed her too much this season, and maybe that's exactly what you want me to say. But I'm looking here at the results for today's race. She finished 4 seconds back. My question to you is, was she in the group with them? Did she kind of miss out on the sprint, or was she kind of off the back the whole time?
Uh, she was hanging in there, but her face looked like Orts' face. It looked like a lemon in the squeezer, or a cucumber that's cut in the middle and left in the fridge overnight. It looked like it needed to come from the furthest part of her body. She needed to find the energy in her toes to hang with them. It was suffer, suffer, suffer. And after the finish, she also collapsed in the shade. Clearly, the heat affected her.
Yeah, it's possible that the heat affects her. I don't know. It's still early in the season. Maybe she's trying to round out her form, come into better form, for the prime part of the cross season. Hard to say, but today's result, Jury, that's a great result for her. You said that was handed to her on a silver platter. Yeah, maybe it was, but she still has to be there. She still has to have the hands ready to get the silver platter. So good for her. Let down by Schreiber, again, somebody that came to Spain and basically left with nothing, because I don't think second is what she was looking for here.
Absolutely. Schreiber was aiming for the title, and she didn't get it. She will be disappointed, and fully agree. Cherie needed to be there, and she was, and that's impressive. Final note on the women's U23 race: Victoria Gladenova, 6th, might be a slightly disappointing result, but this is not a course for her. If things get muddy, we'll see her be closer to Celia Jury. And also worth noting, don't read too much into these time gaps, because if you're in your own or with one rider, compared to a group, or especially if Schreiber's doing a time trial at the front of a group, that helps so much. It's a road race, so in a road crit, if you see somebody get dropped, they get lapped quite quickly. The laps here are a bit longer, the pace is a bit slower, but you get the idea I'm trying to present you. And then the men's U23 race. Before the race, we had a expectation that Haverdings and Jente Michels would be having a two-way duel for the title, and actually we got that quite early on in the race already. David Haverdings capitalized on a bad start of Jente Michels, opening a gap. Michels was quick to move through the field, and we went to 3 leaders: Michels, Haverdings and the Italian Scappini. There was a regrouping, but Michels attacked again. This time only Haverdings could follow. The Italian Filippo Agostinaccio was able to bridge across a roughly 10-second gap to these 2 leaders, which was impressive because the Italian was certainly not on my favorites list ahead of this race. We went into a final lap in which Haverdings and Michels were clearly a little bit better than Agostinaccio. They were juking for position. We saw dive bomb after dive bomb. Haverdings knew he needed to be in first position going into the technical section. So in the first 180 before the second pit zone, there were 2 of them, He sends it down the inside. He throws a little back wheel drift, puts his shoulder out, and takes the lead. Havertings does the perfect thing. He's in the lead where he needs to be in the lead. But then as they pass the pit zone, his chain snaps. It's gone. There's no saving it for Havertings. He finishes 10th. Michels then is of course in the prime position with Agostinacho a few seconds behind. He can sit up and take the European title for a second year in a row. Agostinacho is super happy with second, and all of a sudden we have a sprint for the bronze medal as Owen Sparfel beats Jordi Corses, both riders who came forward quite strong in the final part of the race. Again, the same question for you, Patrick. What do you want to know here?
I think the obvious question for you, Noah, is if Havertings' chain doesn't snap, how does this race end?
Oh, yeah, that is a really tough question because for so much of this race, they were so evenly matched, and we saw them duke it out in that technical section so many times. This was not the first time that they were dive bombing each other, like from far out, super late on the brakes into those corners. They'd done it a number of times already. They traded shot, they traded punches. If it was a boxing match, it would have been 8-8 in terms of scores, and I think Michels would have won, but I say this with the least amount of confidence that I have. I think that he would have been able to stick on the wheel through that section, and then he has a good sprint, he is a good road rider, would have just about had it to come around. But boy, that was a really good battle, and I do feel for Havertings because he is not the luckiest rider at these championships. In Fayetteville, I don't really think it's luck. It was more of a skill issue. He crashed when he was the top favorite, but I do think Havertings, even in the light of this, needs to see the positive because he is much, much better than last year.
Rounding out the podium here, Noah, is Owen Sparfel. How was his race today?
Smart. I bet you Jordi Corses, he'll want to, punch is maybe a bit of an over-exaggeration, but he'll be fuming. Because Corses was quite far back at the start, and Sparfel was dropped by the leading group. He could not follow Agostinacho when Agostinacho came across. Then Corses came into the picture of that second group, and Sparfel sat in the wheel for 2, probably 3 laps, and then only started pacing in the final lap. On every straightaway, Sparfel was like, no, bro, I can't take over, I'm done. I'm gone. I'm dead. This is not for me. I'm not built for this. And then, of course, in the final lap, what does he do? Of course, he has the legs to take over, put Corses under pressure. At some point, it looked like they might still even come across to the leaders. But it was a remarkable race by him because he is a first year. Yes, he utilized the strength of Corses, but it's also a tactical strength. Corses continues pacing, and Sparfel gets thrown a lifeline to 4th, and then because the chain snaps of Havertings to a medal. And it is remarkable, and you can see that the work that the French are putting in is starting to pay off because they've had a restructuring of their cyclocross program. Géry wins the U23 title a year after she won the junior title. Sparfel won the junior title last year in Pontchâteau. He's on the podium of the U23 title here. Leo Bicio is still sitting at home waiting to start his cyclocross season. He will do so later. The French will have 2 medal contenders at the Cyclocross World Championships U23 men in Ливен, and that is positive. And while we're on that, I do also want to say that Agostinacho, that was a surprise to me. And we'll come to more Italian success in a little bit, but the Italians also delivered today with Pontoni coaching them. It was a surprise. Yes, I perhaps underestimated the Italian scene. Yes, this fast court suits them, but the Italians taking away a bucket of medals, also winning the mixed relay, they will be looking back on a successful weekend. I'll just give you the rest of the top 10, but I really don't think there is all too much to talk about there with Michels, Agostinacho, Sparfel. Corses will say still a strong race by him. Bommenel 5th, ahead of Van Lierop. Miguel Rodriguez Nova finished 7th, ahead of Guus van der Einde. Raúl Mira Bonstrate finished 9th, ahead of David Havertings in 10th. Funny was to see that Samuele Scapini was sitting up celebrating an 11th place. Didn't really know. It's a good result for him, but it was a bit odd to see him that happy with 11th. And what I said about the Italians, for the Spanish, it's not as much as a result of their program, but also having riders in the top 10 of this race. I think they had riders in the top 10 of 5 out of 6 races, that is a very good showing in their home country.
I think this is the most diverse leaderboard we're seeing here today, too. 5 out of 10 riders being from countries that aren't Belgium and the Netherlands. Is that showing us something for the future? Are we going to see a shakeup here in the future at the elite level?
I will say this. The Belgians, they have a bit of a talent drought at the moment. Yes, Corses is very good, and he's growing, and he's a second year. But the last few generations of junior, well, you can just ignore the women's part because the Belgians are irrelevant there and will be for a few more years. But on the men's part, they've had a drought. And the question always is Parvel going to stay in the sport? Is Leo Bicio going to stay in the sport? How does Bomenel develop? I do think Agostinacho, it's important to note, he's a final year U23. He has an age advantage. The course is atypical. But I do think that the Belgians have a bit of a talent drought at the moment, which could lead, at least for the World Cups, to a number of different flags at the front of the races. Probably not these Spanish riders here. They probably just profit from a very fast course. I will say this, though, as a final mark, Aaron Dox, 12th, he was one of my favorites. I predicted him for the silver medal. He's normally good on these type of courses. Never really got into this race. Had a bad start, moved forward, blew up, fell back to where he started his comeback. The Belgians win 2 titles, and maybe we can leave a final overall overview of the other teams for the end, but 2 titles and a bronze medal. How do you think that the Belgians reflect upon this weekend?
I don't know. I mean, I think the Belgians always come in with high standards. They get the men's elite win. They'll be happy with that, but largely, probably slightly unhappy. Probably always looking for more.
Yeah, because I do think the intern Bonds coach had a regular level of expectations, a realistic, but the realisticness of these expectations were lower than usual because they couldn't stack up in the youth categories. And I will say it doesn't help if in half of the races you're irrelevant because you don't have any women that do great. And that is becoming an increasing issue for the Belgians because for years they could mask it with tons of medals on the men's side, like a junior men's podium lookout. But that actually doesn't seem too likely because if we move to the junior men's race now, we saw that in the first part of the race, the Belgians kind of had to accept that the race was ridden without them. Valentin Hofer was super active in the first part of the race. We saw Agostinacho, the brother, Mattia, was in the front of the race here. He took a tumble on the barriers. Vassal, one of the favorites here in the absence of Bazant, had issues on the technical sections. He wouldn't feature in the race. In the middle part of the race, we did see the Belgians feature as Agostinacho fought to get back, but with 2 laps to go, we had 9 leaders, and the Belgians would eventually fade a bit in the final part of the race because Agostinacho and Hofer, the men of the opening hour, dominated the final part of the race. The decisive moment was in the penultimate lap. Agostinacho was trying to move his way through the field. A Belgian nearly got pushed into the pits. He chopped Agostinacho. Agostinacho needed to put a foot down. I don't think he crashed. He was coached by a lot of Italian staff along the course. And he lost a few places. And then after the stairs, on a section of the lap where nothing happened all day towards this gravel path, the pace dropped at the front and he attacked from the back. Nobody reacted. The Belgians had smoked themselves in the middle part. The others were like, not for me at the moment. And from there on, he could take victory. Behind him, people did try and close the gap, but they didn't come any closer. In the final lap, it was Hofer who took the silver medal. The bronze medal went to a Belgian, Mats van de Einde, but only after Arthur van den Boer had a crash or a snapped chain in the very final stages of the race. He was definitely on course for a medal, silver or bronze. He was in that medal position in the downhill corner of the bridge onto the tarmac. So that was unfortunate for Van der Boer, but luckily for the Belgians, Van der Einde still took a medal.
Do you think Hofer would have won if he would have been less active at the beginning of the race?
I don't think so. Agostinacho crashed in the first part of the race, needed to fight back. The overall impression he made was just too strong. Hofer is a road rider. He races for Cannibal Be Victorious, so that's the Bahrain Victorious development team. And you could see that in his racing style. I didn't tip either of these in the preview podcast, and it's hard to compare, and I certainly underestimated the Italian domestic scene across all categories. And it's also just the downside of the way we do our previews. We like to cut it short, the favorites list. We don't like doing super long lists in which we name everything. I was wrong. I underestimated them. Agostinacho was really, really strong. Just like his brother, he seems to be thriving on these fast courses. And considering the effort he needed to put in, I don't think the efforts that Hofer put in would have ultimately made the difference. In the women's U23 race, I said Schreiber should have been more conservative. In this race, I would say the opposite was true in a way. Because if there's 9 leaders, the aspect of, hey, I need to conserve energy becomes a bit different. Because if you're in 5th, you'll be in the big tombola and the big lottery behind fighting for positions. And that also costs a lot of energy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
A few final notes here. Benjamin Noval Suarez, Spanish rider in 4th. He is a first year. I was impressed by his ride. He had some sort of mechanical at some point in the race, but he managed to come back 4th just off the podium. That is an encouraging result. This might be a Spaniard that we see do well, although I've heard he's mainly a very strong road racer. Ettore Fabro was in the mix of the medals at some point, another Italian I underestimated. Then we had Cas Timmermans recovering well from a bad start, but if your start is bad here, we've seen it throughout the day, it's very hard to come back from that. We had Théophile Vassal. The French were quite underwhelming in this race. They only had Sohan Ruchen in 8th. Vassal had a very bad day. He completely bonked without even taking the lead too much, finishing 18th. And then the top favorite, Christophe Bazant, didn't start this race because he has been sick. The first race of the day is the last race we cover. It was the junior women's race. For most of the first part of the race, we had Bukovska from the Czech Republic setting the pace. She was taking turns with the Swiss rider Anja Grossmann in doing so. And that eventually led to a situation in the third lap where a number of other riders messed up, giving 4 riders a gap. It were Bukovska, Grossmann, Meka Baka, and Georgia Pelizzotti. Pelizzotti is the daughter of Franco Pelizzotti, the Italian former winner of the KOM jersey in the Tour, but he got popped for EPO and then lost that KOM jersey. But it was fun to see that there is a picture of Pelizzotti standing on, or being held as a 1-year-old on the Tour podium with her dad. Back to the racing, because it was a thrilling battle. In the penultimate lap, Kabaka went down on the barriers, and that was game over. There were 3 riders fighting for the win, Pelizzotti, Bukovska, and Grossmann. Grossmann took the lead ahead of the crucial technical section, and therefore also was able to take the win. She stretched enough of a gap to take the win, which she dedicated to what I understand is her close friend Michael Furer, who tragically died at the Road World Championships in Zurich. Furer was definitely in memory as she pointed to the sky also on the podium. Bukovska was next to her with Pelizzotti taking 3rd. Patrick, it's a long podcast. We're nearing the end of it. Let's keep it short here. What would you like to know? Maybe 1 or 2 questions about the junior women's race.
Well, it's pretty atypical here to see 3 first-year juniors on the podium. Is this a sign of things to come?
I do think so, yes, because we know that Grossmann and Bukovska are riders that do well on fast courses. Pelizzotti, I don't really know. I mean, obviously these have only been in my picture very short, but it is promising. And if you also look at the results of last year, the second years were not that great. They were finishing 7th and 9th at the World Championships, which are more than respectable results. But Géry, as a first year, for instance, finished on the podium. And back then in Hogerheide, Vidal Lopez de San Roman finished 11th and was 4th first year junior with that result. So I do think the first years now are strong, and that the second year generation is also a bit weaker. To conclude though, Kotwaldova, who finished 6th, will do better on the muddy courses, and the same can be said for Kabaka, who could have perhaps won if it wasn't for that crash, but I struggle to see her be in the right position at the right time to win. If we look at the medal table to conclude these World Championships, we see that there were 9 countries winning a medal, which is quite a lot. Italy won 2 gold, a silver, and a bronze. Belgium has 2 gold and 2 bronze. I think I mentioned 1 bronze earlier, but that was a mistake. I forgot to calculate Iserbyt's bronze medal. Netherlands was 3rd with 1 gold, 1 silver, and 3 bronze. France 4th, and then Switzerland 5th. Would you agree with me that Italy is the big overperformer here this weekend?
I would agree with that. But my question back to you is that have more to do with the style of the course we raced on versus, anything else?
Well, yeah, it's an atypical course, as I said a number of times, and that does factor in here. The mixed relay medal, that puts them on top of the medal table, even if you don't want to count that, then you can still say that they had a very successful weekend with a gold, a silver, and a bronze. Ferri, for instance, second year from Italy. I did mention her in the preview, and I was quite upset that I didn't because I saw her race in Benidorm last year. These Italians, most of them are quite good on the fast courses, so that does play a role, but I do think we will see in the youth categories for the rest of this year and probably also next year and the year after that the countries who have restructured their programs, Italy, Czech Republic, France, will continue to thrive. Switzerland, not as much. It seems like they are lucky with 1 female talent at the moment, and it's not a structural thing because everybody does mountain biking there. But these countries, and I think you might be more familiar with this, Canada has also restructured its program. They are also getting the results from that, whereas you see countries like Switzerland or like the US who don't restructure their programs and don't really have a clear direction of what they're doing, they don't really see an improvement in their results.
Yeah, and we've talked before about how at the youth levels, you see a lot of Italian riders at the top of the field, but then once we get to elite, it's pretty rare to see it. A lot of that has to do with those riders getting pulled over to the road, getting pulled to other disciplines. Do you think we see those riders stay in cross in the future?
I think a bit more now, especially with the French, because there are multiple French teams. Arkea is on Bianchi. Bianchi thinks it's super important to have a presence in cyclocross. Van Rijssel is also big time on the cyclocross bikes. Obviously, you won't see them do a full cyclocross season, but I do think because there's a number of bike manufacturers that are backing this now, that we can see those things a bit more often, that they at least do a semi-cross campaign starting in December and racing till Worlds, which is good for the sport. And while we're on that, Vietzi has been signed by Alpecin, which I think is a great step to his development, and I've heard rumors that Raphael Carrier is in negotiations to join Arkea as a stagiaire next year, which is another great opportunity to develop.
Yeah, it's always good to see the cross riders moving into other disciplines and also developing within the sport. It'll be interesting to see as these riders get older if they stay in cross and if they continue to progress, and maybe we'll see some new countries at the top of the leaderboard in the next few years.
Fingers crossed, because that would certainly be exciting. We're around the hour mark, probably slightly over it by now, so let's wrap up this episode of the Cyclocross Social podcast by giving you the results of the other races, because yes, there was also more racing this weekend. There was the Rivabel cross in Ouistreham in France. It's a cross on Sword Beach, one of the D-Day landing beaches. Thomas Mean took the win ahead of Sander de Vet and Timothy Gabriel. Julie Brouwers won the women elite race ahead of Lucels and Lise Klaas. Then, on the other side of the ocean, there was a warm-up race for the Pan American Championships in Missoula. Ian Ackert took the win ahead of Scott Funston and Curtis White. Isabella Holmgren won the women elite race ahead of Sydney McGill and Katie Klaus. Patrick, thank you so much for being here, waking up early to watch the racing.
Thanks for having me, Noah. It was fun.
Certainly, I spent my entire day watching bike racing, and I'll spend my evening watching bike racing as I'll watch the Pan American Championships, and I will dedicate a podcast to that later this week. Thanks everyone for listening. See you guys then. Stay tuned. Goodbye.